Hi everybody, Mitzi Red here, and welcome back into my studio for the second part working with this beautiful blue willow quilt that you see behind me. Now, a quick review over the first lesson we went over, and in that one what we talked about was your basic tools you would need for quilting. We talked about cutting, and we went ahead and got everything together to make your first set of blocks. So you should actually have 12 of these blocks all completed, done, ready to go. Now, of course, these blocks are the same ones you're going to see here, and our quilt is going to be 3 blocks across by 4 down. And of course, with that, you're going to see in the middle here all the beautiful sashing, and that's what we're coming to today. We're going to look at your sashing, getting that all together, cutting it, putting it together, how we change it up to make these little corner pieces, your corner sashing blocks, and starting to put this quilt top together. I hope you found that as you went along with the process of making those churn dash blocks, that it's a really quick and easy quilt to do. And like I mentioned before, it's great for the beginner. It's also great for the advanced quilter, just anybody who needs a good, fun, quick quilt to turn out. So again, you should have all 12 of your blocks ready to go. And like I said, we're gonna go ahead and touch on sashing. Now, if you look at the sashing here, you're gonna see you have the dark navy and the white print, the same as we have in the middle of your blocks. Now remember, mine's gonna look a little bit different than yours because I'm doing a special one out of those gorgeous Texas batiks. So for mine, for my dark, what would be comparable to the navy is gonna be this great little gray, darker gray fabric that I picked out that has the white spots on it. Because let me tell you what, it makes me think of those great stars at night in Texas. I miss those big open skies for sure. So this one was perfect to go with it. So let's talk the sashing. Now, if you look at your directions on page 1 of the pattern, you see it has the directions for your cutting there. And then as you move over into page 2, it gives you your directions on putting those sashings together, okay? So of your light color, which is your white, on that one, you actually are gonna cut 20 1.5 strips of fabric. Now that is your strips by your width of fabric, so your full folded length over, right side showing, not away from you. Then of your opposite fabric or your actual sashing fabric, that dark color, and this one the dark navy, mine's gonna be that dark gray, you're actually gonna come in and cut 34 of those 1.5 inch strips. It's a lot of strips, right? But we needed to get all these gorgeous sashings that go all the way around those churn dash blocks. So let me give you a quick little hint to save you some time, because if you have to measure each one 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, it can take a long time to get to cutting. So I'll give you another tip and technique that I use every time I cut strips because it's gonna save me. So let me slide these out of the way. I've got a little piece of fabric still here left over. Obviously we've got bigger ones when you're cutting into your sashing for the first time. But I've got my little leftover piece I'm gonna show you because I've already got my sashings cut and ready to stitch up. So you remember back in the day when we were in school and we probably told our math teachers, and I'm sorry if you're a math teacher watching this, I totally apologize for being that kid also. They said I would never need math and fractions when it came to being a grown-up. Well, guess what? As quilters, we use it every day, right? So in this situation, we're working with 1.5 inch strips. Now, I mentioned last time, of course, my big ruler I use is an 8.5 by a 24. And I love this one because it lets me get those full strips cut, okay? And the quickest way I can do this is think about, okay, well, how many 1.5 inch strips can I cut in this ruler? It brings it down to how many less times I have to move my ruler. It's kind of one way to think about it. So for me, I'm always looking at, so for 1.5, 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, because my ruler's an 8.5. So I know I can make 5 cuts without having to do too much movement in remeasuring my ruler. Now, the strip I have in front of me today, obviously we're working with a smaller piece that I've already cut down, but you know what? I can still put it on 3 inches. So, I've got my edge, it's already previously been cut, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line it up here, 3 inches on the long. Let me just straighten that out. Okay, and so I'm gonna make my cut, get rid of my scrap piece, I'm not gonna need that. And then I can just gently move my ruler over without moving my fabric to that 1.5. Once I've got that all lined up there and there, I can cut that. And then when I come out and move my ruler away, I've got 2 already. So those math skills and those fractions kind of come back to us after all. But that way, like I said, with my ruler being the 8.5, I can easily cut 5 of those 1.5 inch strips before I really need to do a whole lot of moving with it. So let me show you kind of what you've got there. And what you're gonna see, of course, is what we're making is a big sashing strip. Now, this one I'm gonna show you is going to be the light, the dark, the light. And of course, all of our main ones are the dark, light, dark. Don't worry, I've got those 2 ready for you. So I'm gonna move those fresh cuts I just did out of the way. And how we're gonna do it is you're gonna lay your strips out to make those really good, long sashing strips that we're gonna cut down to get to that smaller size. Okay, so like for this one that's gonna make those small corner blocks, corner pieces, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my light, my dark, and my light. Okay, now on this particular style, you've only gotta make 2 sets of strips like this. So that goes pretty easy. On the other ones though, because they're gonna come out looking like this in just a minute, the other style that's your main section of your sashing is gonna be dark, light, dark. So again, I've already cut all these up. I've got a couple here we're gonna still sew together before we cut them down. Because if you go ahead and sew these long strips together, then when it comes time to do your cuts to get this set in size, you're gonna be a little bit more precise than if you came in and say you cut them down first to the sections, then you tried to sew them. You could end up being a little off on your size. And you know, we talked about last time, we gotta get that size and that 1/4 inch down just perfect in order to avoid, you know, your quilt not fitting together well, and not getting good points, not getting good straight lines. So on this one, which is gonna be like our main one we're gonna do, again, it's dark, light, dark. So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna get my sewing machine set up, we're gonna start stitching this together, and then we're gonna go ahead and I'll show you how to cut them and get ready to start putting this beautiful top together so that your quilt is starting to come back into place. We'll be right back. Okay, so now it's time to go and start sewing these long pieces together. Now, if you remember from the last video, I talked about I don't use pins a lot. If you're more comfortable with using a pin to start holding these together, please do. Don't hesitate, it's perfectly fine. It's just a personal preference for myself. One thing I do want to show you though is what you may find is that your different fabrics are a little bit different in length. And so they're not going to be perfect all the way together on the end. So let me explain that. There's multiple manufacturers of quilt fabric out there, right? And so with it itself, the average quilt fabric, when you take it off the bolt, the width is usually between 42 to even 44, maybe even 40 inches in width. So depending on the different manufacturer, like if you've got 2 different manufacturers of fabric that you're using, you may find that your widths are a little bit different on your strips. It's all right. Remember how we trimmed off those selvage edge last time? We're gonna do the same thing again. So let's go and start putting these together, and I'm gonna walk you through that step. Now I'm gonna be doing the sashing that's here, this color, the dark, light, dark. So I'm just gonna put my sashing strips one on top of the other. Again, we're always gonna use that 1/4 inch seam. So I'm gonna go ahead and my machine is already set up for that. My foot is already in place for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop my needle in. And let me just get this laid out. I like putting my light fabric on top, and here's my reason why. I can then see if they're not sitting directly on top of each other because that dark fabric's gonna show through on my light fabric. My light's on the bottom, I'm not gonna see that light fabric to the dark. So just another little tip of how I always line it up to make sure I've got it right. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take it little by little. Now, I wanna make sure I'm not pulling and tugging on my fabric. I don't wanna stretch it. If you stretch it, you're gonna find that once you get ready to press it, you're gonna get kind of a puckering. And so let your machine do the work for you, all right? So I'm just gonna go ahead and take off stitching here. I am once again keeping on a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And every now and then I'm gonna have to stop and I might need to reposition my fabric just so I can make sure that they are laying one on top of the other as I'm going down. Now I'm positioning all the way down like to the end of my table actually, so that I can just go ahead and let it feed through. Again, keeping a nice 1/4 inch seam. You know, I'm not using pins in this, but if you are more comfortable pinning your fabric, absolutely do it. The pins will help keep you from pulling on it to prevent any puckering. But if you feel pretty confident that you're not gonna pull on it, you're just gonna let the machine feed it through, that's all right too. Go ahead and feel free to do this. One of the main reasons I don't use the pins on these longer pieces is these are 40, like I said, 42 to 44 inch strips. That's a lot of pins I've got to stop and pull out. And you know, I'm kind of a speed quilter. I do like to quilt fast. You will see with my work that it goes, I do go through everything pretty quickly. So I'm coming up here to the end. And I'm just going to stitch the end before I go ahead and cut my fabric, or pardon me, cut my threads. We're not cutting fabric just yet. It will be coming though. All right, so I've got my 2 pieces stitched together. I do have my iron hot over here, so I did go and set that up ahead of time. And just like kind of what we talked about last time, you do want to go ahead and press to one side or the other. Now again, you do see me moving my iron, but right now I'm just pushing that steam through it more than anything. Okay, I want to make sure I get a nice good steam all the way through. Kind of sets those threads in place. Okay, now next up, I'm going to open it to where I'm pressing to the dark side. Remember we talked about last time, the reason we often press the dark side is it prevents those dark fabrics from showing through your much lighter fabrics. So once again, I'm just going to open that and lay that dark back and go ahead and get that pressed open. It's trying to stay closed on me, but I want to make that nice and open. I want to press it down just enough to where it stays open for me and to where that dark is going to stay laying over. Now you do again see me gliding across my fabric, and yeah, it kind of looks like, well, isn't that traditional like ironing? And remember what I said, we are pressing, not ironing. I'm not putting starch in trousers or jeans or anything like that. I am just making sure that's coming and staying open. So it's just a very gentle glide that I'm doing on there. Okay, so let me set my iron back in place. So we've got the 2 pieces then opened. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and then I want to go ahead and attach the next dark one. Now this one, because of the way everything's laying, if I tried to lay it over, which I can, you're going to have more of your 2 pieces on top, which are totally fine. But remember me telling about them being different size a lot of time. So like for example, this one is, because you can definitely see the difference in between on the size, right? So I'm just going to line my selvage edges up. That's what I'm going to work with. And I don't have to be perfect with it because there is enough available in your yardage that came with your kit that it's going to be perfectly fine to cut those selvage edges off. So no worries there at all. So I'm just going to go ahead, once again I'm going to stitch, starting here on my 1/4 inch seam on the end there, and let me go ahead and just run this one through. I'm doing the exact same thing I did for when I was putting just the 2 pieces together. Of course now we're going to have, when it's all pressed out, it's going to be the 3 pieces together. And you're going to have that sashing done, just like you see going in between all those blocks. So let me just run this through real quick. Again, I'm going to stop ever so often. I'm just going to adjust to make sure my fabric edges are one right on top of the other. Okay, so again, I use steam and my fabric is starched, all right? It's a personal preference. You're gonna have those who would be totally against everything I just told you to do, and that's okay. It's just what they like compared to what I like. The level of starch can vary from quilter to quilter, but I do like giving mine a good steam press. When I'm working on blocks and pieces that are a lot of seams coming together, I actually have a steam press I will put those into in order to make sure I get really good flat seams. Once again, let's go ahead and just get into ironing on this one, or I should say pressing, right? Still an iron. So I'm just going to give it a once over to kind of help set those threads in there. Okay. And this is the advantage of keeping a small pressing mat close to your machine. Now I've certainly got my big ironing board out in the rest of my studio, but I don't need it for right now. So just the small pieces. So I'm just going to go ahead, press those, put some steam into it. If I've got an edge that just is really wanting to try to roll over on me or it doesn't want to stay in place, I can certainly put my iron, give it a little bit of pressure to hold it. So you hear that steam and the coming through on mine. I am definitely a fan of steam by all means. And what you see me working on is my Martelli mat. It has the cutting board and it's a rotating surface also. I did one little trick though with it. I believe Martelli does come with the wool mat they can put on theirs. I didn't have one, so I actually cut mine down to fit it because I do really like pressing with a wool mat underneath. It just helps to push that heat right back into it. So as you can see, we have nice sashing ready to go. Pieces just like that and that. So I've got my dark, light, dark. You'll repeat the same thing with your light, dark, light. So when you're all said and done, and it comes down to it, you've actually got, let's see, 2 pieces of the light, dark, light, and I believe it is 16 total. Yeah, 16 total of the dark, light, dark is what you're going to be coming in with. So let's go ahead and look at cutting these down because you're going to have to cut them down to get ready to put your sashing in. We're going to work with the main part, the dark, light, dark, okay? Now, if you remember, I was talking about, we're going to cut off those selvage edge. We do not need it, so we're just going to go ahead and get rid of it. So let me go ahead and take that off and out of the way. Just to get rid of those edges. Now, I do like to line up again on my mat in multiple lines on my rulers to make sure I'm getting as nice and straight of a cut as possible. So we're just going to cut that edge off. And then if you go ahead and look at your directions, and this is actually down on your bottom of your page 1 where it talks about assembling the sashing in the corners, you actually are going to be cutting these down. This is at a 3.5 now between all of those strips, but you're cutting it to a 16.5 inch to make those wider or those longer sashing pieces that are coming here and there. So a couple ways to do this. Almost all of our mats are going to have a 16.5 inch mark somewhere along the way that you could actually lay it out and mark it. But for me, again, there's advantage of having that big ruler because that one also has my markings on there. And it gives me a few more lines to work off of. So what I'm going to actually do is go ahead and find my 16.5 inch mark on this one. I'm going to use one of my lines here from my seam and my ruler to match up. And as soon as I've got a really good match on that, real good straight piece, I'm going to go ahead and make my cut. Okay, so 16.5 is what we are going for. And there we go. Now these pieces are what are going to be used to do the sashing going this way as well as this way, because each one is going to be subcut down to fit into its proper places. So what we're coming down to then is of those long strips you just made with them, you know, you got the really nice long pieces. We're going to cut these down to 16.5. And it's going to leave you some left over. And if you look at your directions there on page 2, then we're going to cut those into even smaller pieces, which are going to come in to fit these little sections right here in the center of your corner blocks. So it's all going to get used. You're going to have a little bit of extra, but that's a good thing because that way if you do miscut a little bit, you've got just a little bit of wiggle room to work with it. So what I want you to do right now is go ahead and cut these down to the 3.5 by 16.5. That's dark, light, and dark. Now you've also got your directions in there for your light, dark, light. Now that one itself is only going to be 2 sets that you're going to have, and you'll need to put those together, the light, dark, light. It's going to end up looking just like this one here. Okay, obviously yours is going to be the white and the navy. And of that one, now that one is all going to be cut down into these smaller sections here. So if you take a peek at your direction, you're going to actually cut down to 40 of those. So you'll have the light, dark, light is going to be 40 of those. The dark, light, dark. Now these are those little 1.5 inch strips you're going to make. You're going to get 20 of those because we've got 2 and 1 in each of those corners. And then you're coming in a total of 31 of these that are the 3.5 by 6.5. Don't worry, all your directions are right there in your pattern. So go ahead and cut those down, and then next up, we're gonna start putting sashing on blocks and making those rows get started. See you in just a minute. All right, welcome back in here. So now by this point, we should have our sashings cut. Now remember, we are at a 3.5 by 16.5 on our size. And hopefully you've gone ahead then and also cut your little small 1.5 inch pieces, and they're all ready to go as well. So let me show you where we're taking it from here. First off, we're gonna make the nice little 9-patch cornerstones. That's what we're going for first. And because we need those in order to set in our plate pieces for our sashing. So let's go ahead and start with that. Can you cut the TV for me, please? That's why I paused. Thanks. All right, so I've got my pieces here I need. Now, these are gonna make, again, these super cute little 9 patches. They're gonna offset on your sashing and your blocks to help you get those seams lined up. So in order to make that 9 patch, you have 2 of the 1.5 inch strips that are the light, dark, and light, and 1 that's the dark, light, dark. Did I say that right? I just went totally blank. Okay, hold on. We'll cut that too. All right, so for making the really cute 9 patch that we're gonna have, that's gonna sit here in your corner between all your sashings. So for that, of your 1.5 inch pieces, you're gonna need 2 of them that are your light, dark, light, and then 1 that's your dark, light, dark. Okay, so let me show you how we're gonna put those together. Now, this is where that pressing we were talking about comes really important when you press to the dark side. Because I did that on my light, dark, light piece, I'm pressing inward to that dark, okay? And I've got my seams already done. I've got it pressed down, it's nice and flat. On my center section, that's that dark, light, dark, again, I've done the same, and I've once again pressed to the dark. Now, here's the advantage of that. When I lay these 2 pieces together and line them up in order to get my edges together so I can go ahead and stitch those edges that were pressed over onto the dark side, they now can just slide right up and kind of almost lock into place with each other. Now I am going to pin on these because these are really small pieces and it just makes it easier to hold it together. So I've got my light, dark, light pinned to my dark, light, dark, okay? Doesn't matter which side is up when you stitch this first piece. I'm gonna go ahead and just get that stitched down though. Again, remember, it's always a quarter inch seam. So let me go ahead and stitch that down. Okay, and again, as soon as I do this, I wanna go ahead and press this open. Now, here's where we wanna think about on the pressing part. These are going to match up to the ends here on our sashing. Again, on those, I press to the dark, okay? So what I wanna make sure of is when I come in and I'm putting, let's see, whoops, let me flip it here, putting this here on it, that again, I am gonna go ahead and make sure it's all lined up. And by doing that, because I made that press, it makes it super easy for when we come in and we're putting these on. Now, to make it easy on both directions, because again, we're coming from here as well as here, I still want to press to that dark. So I'm going to consider the center piece my dark. It's got the two darkest pieces on there. So that's kind of an easy way to remember it. So I'm going to grab my iron. Once again, I'm going to press right there to the dark so that I can get a nice flat on there. Give it a little bit of extra press down. Just want to make sure those seams are nice and flat because you do have a lot that are in there. So you want to get them as flat as possible. I'm going to put my other piece on. Now this is my light, dark, light, the extra piece, which is going to connect onto that dark, light, dark to make that nice little 9 patch. Once again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stitch that down. Make sure all of your press seams stay nice and flat as they're going under your foot and those stitches are going into it. Open it up. So you've got it here, but once again, I'm going to press towards that center to those dark edges. And once you get into a kind of consistent nature of always pressing one way or the other, it just becomes natural. It's just going to feel totally natural to do that. Okay, so that is all done. And it's time to start working on our sashing rows. Now let me stand up here and show you what we're doing. We're going to be building, there are actually 5 of these that go all the way down the quilt. And those are going to be spaced on each side of your rows. So like for example, here's mine, right? And we're going to be sitting it right there in that position. So the first thing I'm going to start with is one of my 9 patch. Now you obviously want to make sure that a dark is touching that light center. So it's really easy to go, which way do I have it? But the nice thing is, because of the way these are done, if you can't really get it wrong. Either way, it's still going to show on there. So to make that row, first row of sashing, you can see you have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those 9 patch corner blocks, and then you have 3 of your sashing. So it's putting these together literally the same way we just put that little 9 patch together. Super simple, super easy. Again, I'm always looking for ways to speed things up for me. So I'm actually going to go ahead and attach a 9 patch on each side of that sashing. So I can just zip one side right through my sewing machine and then come right back on the other side with it too. So let me do that real fast. And all I'm doing is make sure those stay nice and flat on those seams, because we want to reduce our bulk as much as possible. It comes in so handy to have those really good flat seams, especially when we get to the end coming up and we're going to be quilting, or if you're going to send yours off to a long armor, your long armor will certainly appreciate having those nice flat seams on there. Okay, there we go, the first section. Now again, let's look at where we can send it to that it's going to, as far as pressing your seams over to help reduce that bulk. Now I can always come back over here on the top towards that 9 patch, but again, it's going to give it a little bit more bulk. So I'm actually going to press towards the sashing. Again, you'll find your favorite way of doing it. Mine is always going to be looking at to reduce my bulk as much as possible. Okay. So there's one section. We don't have, this goes through really quick and fast. And the nice thing is once we have the sashing all together, then it's going to be really easy to put these rows together and get through them next. So we're just going to build out here for 1 row of sashing to start with. That's your top and your bottom sashings, and then you'll of course have them in between each block as well. And I'm just going to hold off on my pressing till I get to the end of these because we don't have too much more to go for each one. Now remember, for this particular quilt, you're going to make 5 rows just like this. And that way it's going to be on the top above all the blocks, the bottom row below all the blocks, and then of course in between each set of rows that you're working with as well. And I have 1 more piece of sashing to go, because we got to make sure we've got enough for all 3 blocks that are up there to be covered. They each need their own sashing, of course. All right. And like I said, you remember I don't pin a lot, but these, because I'm working with such smaller pieces, and I really want to shoot to make sure those pressed areas line up really nice and neat and lock in, so my lines stay more straight. So I will usually put at least one pin in there. You know, you really shouldn't need more than maybe 2 to 3 pins when you're first starting out, but you'll get down to where you're 1 or none when it comes down to it. All right, I've got one more little corner block to put in place. And you can see it's going together extremely fast, really easy. Always sticking with that 1/4 inch seam, so you want to make sure your foot's following along and that you have found your actual 1/4 inch on your machine setup. Yours may look different than mine, and that's perfectly fine. All right. So let's see how we've got. So that takes us all the way across. So this right there, same as that very top row of sashing. I'm gonna go ahead and give this a little press as well. Now remember, you do have 5 of these to make to go ahead for the whole quilt. So if you wanna go ahead and take your time, make your 5. And last up on this section when we get back is going to be coming along, and we are going to go start putting those rows together with those 12 beautiful blocks you've already made. So work on that sashing, and I'll see you back here in just a minute. Okay, by now, hopefully, you should have those 5 rows of the sashing. Now, it looks a little different behind me, right? Because I've got my design wall pulled down because I like to take a look at things before they all get stitched together. I'd much rather look at it beforehand than have to take those stitches out and come back to it. So what I'm going to show you is some ideas, some tricks for putting together the rows. Make sure you like them. And you know, we all learn from maybe that wasn't how you wanted it. We do end up having to take it apart, but at least if we do it, it's kind of like this, it'll help you to kind of get a better visual of what your quilt's going to come together to look like. Now this is probably my favorite part of the quilt, and it's actually getting it put together because we see all of our hard work coming together. It's coming into one big piece, whether it be for a wall hanging or your bed or whatever it's for. We're finally seeing all those little pieces that we've cut and stitched together start to come as one big whole quilt. So let me talk a little about the design wall. Now mine hangs from the ceiling actually, so I can pull it down and use it and put it back up and out of my way when I don't need it. Don't worry, Blue Willow's hanging out right behind it. But if you don't have a design wall, that's okay. Let me give you some ideas on what you can do to help lay out your quilt. So first of all, one of the easiest ways is lay it out on your bed. Lay the pieces out and take a look at them. See if you like the way they're positioning, the colors. You know, do you have too much of one color here, too much down there? That way you can twist and turn the blocks all you want to make sure you come up with the location you want them to be. This comes more important when you're working with a lot of different colors. With Blue Willow, we've got some different shades. We've got some lights, we've got some darks, and some mediums on the blues. So you still want to kind of position those to see where you like them at. Maybe you want all your darks in one end and all your lights in the other, give that little ombre effect. That works too, no problem. But a design wall can certainly help you to find that right positioning. Now again, I know I call it design wall, but it doesn't have to be on the wall. You can do it on your floor, you can do it on a bed, maybe if you've got a big blank wall, you can actually use to just pin up there on the wall, do it. It's not uncommon myself that I will put these up on a design wall and I won't even look at them again until the next day. So I'll put them in position, maybe go to bed, come back the next day, take a look at it, and it's pretty common I'm going to change a few of my blocks and positions around till I find exactly what I want. It just is going to save you some heartache of having to come in later and take it all apart and bring out your seam ripper. So don't worry, you can start putting some things together, and then like I said, put it down, stand back far, take a look at it from afar and see what you like. Now I've already done a little bit of work with that on my side, and so I kind of know where I want things to go. So hence the reason the design wall is down, and the only thing you see right now is my first row of sashing. Because I want to get ready to put these blocks together to figure out what I want, where, and get everything lined up. So what starts is just a couple little pieces is coming together for that big one. Now, I've already put one row together. I'll show you in a minute. And I've got some other pieces here that I'm ready to go. My blocks are ready to go. I've got my sashing. So let me show you a little bit on how to put that together first so that we can make that full row, okay? So as you remember, and do keep in mind, keep your pattern close by because of course on the pattern itself, you do have your design layout. So you can always make sure as you're putting it together up there on your wall or wherever you're doing it, that you are laying everything out in the right place. Now, on your rows, the first piece you're going to start with is going to be a sashing piece. So I'm going to take my block, and this is important if you have a fabric that is directional. Like for example, one of the fabrics in Blue Willows is straight lines. So you might want to figure out, do you want your lines going vertically or horizontally? And think about that when you're putting your sashings on. Now, for the fabric I'm using here, it does have a directional design. It's got the blue bonnets on here. So I know I'm gonna want those facing up. So I'm gonna take my piece of sashing. This is gonna be my outside row piece. And I'm going to lay it down here and line it up. I'm ready to stitch down. Now let me tell you a little bit about with your blocks before you start putting your sashing down. Now our sashing was cut at 16.5 inches in length. Maybe your block is shorter than that, maybe it's longer than that. I always recommend to take a look and do some measurements on your blocks ahead of time before you put your sashing or your rows together. And here's why. Maybe that first block you did, your 1/4 inch seams weren't as spot on as maybe that last block you did. That last block probably measured good 16.5, but the first one might not. Hopefully it doesn't require you to go back and take any of those seams out and reset them, but what it might have you do is need to trim your block down to get them consistent. If you trim your blocks to where they're all consistent in size, you're gonna find your rows go together a lot easier. Now here's the other thought. What if your sashing piece you cut is bigger than your block? Did you mismeasure? Could be. And that's okay too, because you can always just trim off that extra on your sashing. You've got plenty of it available to work with. So let's go ahead and get the sashing on. And I'm just gonna go ahead and line my pieces up here. Take a quick look at them. And remember I said about you might trim your sashing a little long? I did. So that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in place, and I'm gonna trim it after I get all of my rows or all my blocks stitched in for my row. Again, 1/4 inch seam. We always want to make sure we're sticking with that so we can keep our consistency. And I'm just gonna let this feed through our machine. I'm gonna make sure as I come to any of where my seams are meeting at, they are staying nice and flat. Again, we always want to keep really good, really flat seams in there. And slow down as I get here to the edge. And trim. Now this is that first block, okay? So we are gonna put sashing on the outside, block, sashing on the inside. So this one's gonna get 2 pieces. And how I do this, a lot of people ask me how I can be such a fast quilter, and I always say I would work like a factory setting. So I've got everything prepped and ready right there laid out to go. It does save me a lot of time when it comes to the actual stitching part, because everything is right there in front of me ready to go ahead and stitch down and put together. Make sure my fabric is lined up really nice and well. Now I'm going to press these after I get done putting the row together. So I'm not going to go in and press every one of them yet, but you can, nothing wrong with that. So what I want you to see though is as it starts to come together, we're going to have our outside sashing, the block, sashing, block, sashing, block, outside sashing. I've already done one of those rows for us, so let me go ahead and get it up here. Most design walls, if you look at the ones that are available for purchase, do come with the flannel on it, and which is really nice because the flannel will help to hold your fabric up. But if your fabric, as it gets heavier, you may find yourself needing to add a few pins. All right, so here's how we're gonna try this one out and take a look at it. So I know that it's going to fit right in between there. Okay. I'm going to try to do this to get it all held up here without needing pins. But if I do, I can always stick a, oh, you know what? I got to flip that because that fabric right there is directional. We want to see deep in the heart of Texas. So let me get it lined right back up here. And of course it's going to come down at me. I'm going to stick a few pins in that real quick to help hold it. You just get it stuck there for a second, and that's okay. Some of these, they don't always stick as strong, and you can just put a couple pins into your wall just to help hold it up there. We don't want to get it all set up there and have it falling off at us. So let me just put a quick pin in that. There we go. I'll put one in the center just to keep me nice and flat. Obviously, if you're working with a flat surface like your bed or the floor, you're not gonna run into that problem, but that's okay. There's always a way to work around that. So I'll go ahead and grab my pins because we know we're gonna need them and have them ready to go. And let me show you, kind of get an idea like when we're working with the design wall. So I know that this is gonna be my center block, so I'm gonna go ahead and get it lined up there. I'll go ahead and stick a pin in there. That's just gonna hold temporarily. It's okay if it's falling down at me. We're gonna get it lined back up there in a minute because I'm gonna take it down to get it stitched anyway. And one more just to put a temporary hold so you can see it. Okay. That'll get us for the moment. So what I want you to look at here is you can see how the quilt starts to come together. So when I take this down off here in just a moment to stitch it, you know that I've got to have my 9 cornerstone piece lined up with my sashing here. And that's how each block is going to line up. So when it comes to putting the rows together, here's how would you take the steps. You've already done your sashing. That's done. Then come in and start laying out your row the same way I did. So sashing, block, sashing, block, sashing, block, sashing. Okay? Now, again, play these out before you stitch them together so you make sure you really like how everything is color-wise is lining up. Because I'm going to, you know, my next row is going to be a darker blue and then a light and then another blue. Because I want to break up. I don't have a whole lot of red, so I want to break them up. So, but then once you have everything lined up, you know how you like your rows, then you can start putting them together. And that's going to be the part that's going to get exciting because you're going to get to see all those pieces really start to come together and this quilt really build out. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, if you're a beginner quilter, you might not think about this, is currently at this time, if you look at your spacing from your point of your triangle to the top, you've actually got a 1/4 inch there. Or just slightly over. So what it's going to do is when I put that sashing onto it, I'm using a 1/4 inch seam, and it's going to leave that a really, really nice point right there at your seam line. So look for that. That's the exciting part when you see those come together just perfectly. So let me pull this back down real quick. Okay, so I've got my pieces down, and I am going to go ahead and put a few pins in it now because I'm working with some pretty long pieces, and my goal is that those corner pieces of my sashing, the little 9 patch, I really want them to line up as well. And so what I'm actually doing is that I come in, I'm matching up the 9 patch from my sash top, my vertical sashing, with the edge of that block where it meets, or I'm sorry, I should rephrase that. The horizontal sashing with the 9 patch to the vertical sashing that is between my blocks. What that gives me is all of my seam lines are going to line up nice and straight. So I'm going to put my pins in there first. I want to get, that's my point, that's my line. So I want to get those lined up first so that I'm nice and clean on those sides. And then I might throw 1 or 2 in on those blocks just to make sure I've got plenty in there keeping me straight. So don't need too many pins, but enough to keep it held in place. I don't want it sliding all over on me when I'm trying to sew it. Now this is a benefit of having a large table to work with. Obviously, you see my sewing machine actually does set recessed in a cabinet. If you don't have a cabinet that yours sets in, find a nice big table. Maybe it's a dining room table, dinner has to wait until later, right? But find you a nice big space so that your quilt can lay out. Gravity is naturally going to pull your quilt down off of your machine if it's not recessed in a cabinet. So just be aware of that if you start feeling the fabric start to pull. You want to try to keep it up as much as possible. So having a large table to work off of versus it falling onto the ground will certainly be helpful for you because it'll keep it from pulling your fabric. Now I've got that edge, my sashing, set back, and I have it pinned onto that first row. I'm gonna drop my foot in, I'm gonna drop my needle in. Now, you've probably noticed most of the time as we've gone along, I haven't done a whole lot of lock stitching at the beginning when I first take off stitching. This is gonna be the spot where I do, because this is gonna be where those rows start to hold together, and I wanna make sure they're really nice and strong. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and I'll take a few stitches forward. I'm gonna put my machine in reverse, take a few stitches back, and come right back over the top of that. Once again, as you're going along, I'm going to encourage you, and really keep an eye on it, do not let your machine stitch over the top of your pins. Because as I've mentioned in the prior video, you can certainly run into an instance to where if your needle hits the pin, you can break the needle, break the pin, you can even throw your machine off of timing. And what that's going to result in is it's going to have to go in for repairs and then not be quilting much unless you got to back up. So I'm going to make sure I get those pins pulled. I usually let my machine get pretty close to that pin and then give it a quick pull and stick it right back into my pin cushion. I'm going to bring my excess up. Try to leave it sitting in my lap as much as possible, but kind of almost like letting it kind of fall upon itself. That way it's not having, there's not much drag. It's not having to try to pull itself up. It's just kind of loosely folded on top of itself. Okay. We're in the middle block now, halfway through this whole row. Now you can see, and this is an important part, let your machine do the work for you. Don't try to be pulling and tugging on it. Let your machine do the work. That's what they're there for. It's not supposed to be a fight for us to have to get it through there. Just gonna make sure my fabric is laying nicely on top of each other. You can certainly add more pins than I do, especially as you're starting out and getting comfortable and wanting to make sure that your fabric is laying on top of each other. You don't have a good feel for it. Absolutely add your pins in there. You know, space them out well enough that you're not having to stop, you know, every few stitches. But certainly give yourself the support you need for making it happen. Okay, I'm on the last little corner piece here. I'm gonna line that right up. As I come to the end, I'm gonna stop right before I go off my fabric, and I'm gonna go ahead and give it a good reverse. Make sure I lock those stitches in, because again, that's gonna turn out to be kind of a pressure point for you. You're gonna attach your borders on that side, but you just wanna make sure it's really good and sturdy. Okay, now, I haven't pressed it yet, obviously, just done with stitching. My next step would of course be to take it, and I do press every seam as I go. That way I can make sure it is really good and clean, and it's a lot less fight on the iron when you're trying to get everything together to get it up there. But for the temporary, let's just lay it up here and see how we look. We'll get that in a second. If I was only a little bit taller, I could reach all the way to the top. Next time we wear heels, right? All right, S-pin in. Again, obviously I'm gonna press this to make it really nice and flat. I wanna make sure it's really smooth, just as smooth and flat as these are. And coming up next on it, the next step I would do is it would be time to add in another row of the sashing. So that's gonna fit right in there next underneath it. And then we continue row sashing. Your final piece at the very bottom is gonna be your final of your sashing, okay? So from here, what your next step is gonna be is go ahead and complete this center, and it'll be all done for that part. Only thing left after that's gonna be doing your borders, and depending on how you wanna finish it, whether you're gonna finish it yourself under your machine, whether you're gonna send it to a long armor, or whichever way you wanna finish it. Maybe make that friend do it for you since it's your first quilt. All right, and then finalize, we're gonna do sashing. Now those are gonna come on the next step of videos, and so you're gonna wanna join me back. So between now and then, get it all put together, be ready for those borders and those final steps. We'll see you soon. Thanks.